Ses. Ses kontrol. 1, 2, 3. Ses kontrol deneme. Ses. Ses kontrol.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the panelists. This is how many ccTLD workshops we have produced so far. How many? 30.
13,
1-3. Okay, so it's the 13th ccTLD workshop. And I'd like to start thanking all the panelists. This year we have decided to develop a workshop about how the ccTLD community has contributed to spread the information at local level about internet governance. The past couple of years have been quite important in the ccTLD community, and because many of the ccTLDs they have celebrated the 25th anniversary, the 30th anniversary, so they've been linked to the local communities for an incredible long time. So it's really important to underline the interaction of the ccTLDs with the local communities, as they have a knowledge of their local communities, as well as a sort of heritage they got from the local community that probably few other stakeholders, and I'm not going to say multi-stakeholder because somebody in this room is counting how many times the word multi-stakeholder is going to be said, and it's an exercise against the opening ceremony we had yesterday. So it's already 3? No, 1. I didn't say it. Basically, there are really strong links, and it's not only between the ccTLD and the local communities, but also between the regional ccTLD organizations who they are the organizers of this workshop, and the local communities via their membership. So this workshop aims really to underline the importance of having ccTLDs active at local level to spread information and improve what we call the IG literacy within their local communities, but not only. It's a great panel with people with great expertise, and I would like to ask you to introduce yourself when taking the floor. I'd like to start with the regional organizations, and I'm asking them, what have you done to promote IG, internet governance literacy, within your communities, through your communities? What are the best practices you can share? And I leave the floor to the...
On the next slide, the biggest question that we have to ask is really, are we capable of reducing or minimizing some of this problem? I always come with the bad news, and the point is it's going to be very tough for us because it's all about the money, as I say in front. A lot of the organizations that are behind this are doing a lot of, how to say this, have been perfecting a lot of this technique. As a result, on the next slide, you can see that in the underground community, in the next slide, please. Thank you. On your slide here, you can see that the mere fact that will not go away is because of the fact that the underground cybercrime industry is getting a lot of money from here. In front of you is an underground service prices on how much it costs. If we were probably in this room 10 years ago, this is running on 3 to 6 figures. But today, as you can see, if you want to buy a spamming method technique on the underground community, it can go as cheap as $13 to about $100. One thing also is on the next slide, you can see that they have turned around as well in providing spamming as a service. If you can just push the next slide, sir. Okay, should come up quickly now. Sorry for this. Here is this one. Slash. Anyway, you can see also that the underground community is offering a lot of services. Ordinary people who are obviously have the intent to disrupt the service can just buy from the community, this cybercriminal community, spamming services, which means that if I want to spam a specific country, a specific institution, most of the services are already available in this, as cheap as $10, as pricey as about $50,000, and here you go. Depends on what kind of spamming technique do you want. My bottom line is spam is still probably sexy in the eyes of a lot of cyber criminals because, as I said, they are able to convert all the clicks that we do and all the redirections that we do into money. And the challenge is how much regulation is in place. Our best practices and our guidance are adept into what we see as the new form of techniques and methods that they're using. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next I have Yanis, who can provide some perspective from the mobile industry.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm Yanis Theodorou. I'm a public policy manager at the GSMA, which is the mobile industry global trade body based in London. I'd like to start by congratulating the contributors and authors of the paper because I think it captures in depth the key issues, challenges, and best practices around spam. Perhaps rightly so, it focuses on email spam because as far as I understand, email accounts for about 90% plus of all spam. But I think it misses the mobile element, and I think it would add value if the paper included a subsection or perhaps a case study outlining, I guess, the industry's approach to tackling mobile spam, by which, of course, we mean SMS and MMS related spam. That's, for example, bulk SMS messages being sent that are fraudulent or intended to encourage consumers to call or text a premium number and then obviously incur a large bill shock at the end of the month. Now, before I go into the outlining the mobile perspective, I'd like to suggest a statement which I think captures the essence of the paper, and that is that to successfully combat spam, we need the willingness of all parties involved to both act and cooperate. And by parties, I don't just mean the network service operators, but also governments and regulators. Now, in the mobile space, this concept of action and cooperation is what led to the GSMA's spam reporting service initiative, which has been around since a few years ago and has already stopped thousands of spammers. But first, just to give you a brief history of mobile spam, why has mobile spam been on the rise? And there are three reasons for that. Firstly, mobile is a better medium, a better platform for spammers to reach mass audiences. Secondly, it's a trusted and well-monitored platform because you and me and everyone carry their mobiles with them 24/7, so it's much more likely for someone to respond to a text near real time. And of course, the cost of sending spam has plummeted in the last few years, in part mainly because of the all-inclusive unlimited SMS plans that are bundled with a mobile phone contract, for example. Now, in 2006, many mobile operators came together, acknowledging the challenges, and developed and signed up to a code of practice. So that's 8 years ago. And that code of practice included a number of commitments, obviously against fighting spam. And one of those commitments, for example, was to include anti-spam provisions in their contracts with third parties, a commitment to cooperate between them, both nationally and internationally, a commitment to educate consumers on the issues. In terms of technical measures, commitments to filter out spam, if they know what to filter out, and obviously shut down SIM cards once they are identified as spam sources. Now, these commitments then led a few years later, in 2009, to the initiative I've mentioned, the Spam Reporting Service, which is essentially a complaint and intelligence gathering tool that does, again, three things. Firstly, it captures reports from subscribers. So basically, you get a text and you forward it to a specific number. In the UK, that's 7726. So you forward the spam, then this tool analyzes the reports and matches them against known attacks. And if there's no match, then they save that report and for future matching or future comparisons. And lastly, the tool also includes a dashboard which displays in real time to whoever has access to it the real-time statistics showing the various spam attacks, the level of threats, where the spam attack has originated, the destination, and clearly a bunch of other numbers are really helpful for two key reasons. One is these numbers help operators target and invest in tools and measures that are better, I guess, at tackling specific threats. And also, the numbers are shared with government authorities who can then prosecute spammers effectively in court. So they act as concrete evidence against spammers who are prosecuted. So that's, again, showing how both the action and the cooperation that I spoke about earlier are combined to reach successful outcomes. Now, over the past 5 years, the SRS was initially adopted in the USA, and since then, operators in New Zealand, Brazil, Argentina, India, and the UK have adopted it. Today, among them, the operators who are signed up cover between them more than 500 million consumers, but clearly that's not enough, and we want governments and operators around the world to also join the initiative and sign up to the SRS so that we can achieve better outcomes. And to sum up, there are three things that one can achieve with this approach. First of all, consumer trust, because if you do the right thing, consumers are likely to like you and stick with you. Gathering intelligence, as I mentioned, both for the operator's perspective in terms of empowering their tools and their filter processes, and also to help government authorities tackle criminals and spammers. And of course, the final thing is savings, because operators, by having this tool, they can save a lot of money from cutting down the cost of delivering redundant messages. In terms of next steps, clearly the objective is to establish a broad international sharing community, enabling operators and governments to act effectively against spam globally. From the GSMA side, we're actively promoting the value of the SRS by conducting in-country workshops to showcase the value and how easy it is to use this dashboard that I talked about, and encourage mobile operators and governments to support the initiative. We're also actively involved with the London Action Plan and are in contact with various government authorities around the world on behalf of our members. In fact, recently we've been praised in the UK Parliament for our work. And finally, as far as governments are concerned, I think there are 3 or 4 recommendations that we would put forward to them. One is, which I'm sure they're raised in the paper and later on, one is to define clear laws, so what's illegal and what's not illegal. Secondly, to work with the advertising industry to develop advertising codes of practice. Thirdly, to give clear powers to their law enforcement agencies so that they can proactively act to use the information gathered and effectively prosecute spammers. And also impose monetary penalties to deter the crime. And finally, we urge governments not to regulate traffic limits or impose limits on the number of SIM cards that can be sold to each consumer, because that wouldn't solve the problem. The spammer will just buy more SIM cards and carry on spamming. So that's not the solution. And I think that's my contribution, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Yannis. I appreciate the information. I think it'll be valuable to move forward into our draft report. Next, I have Julia, who will talk about the Australian perspective and some of the comments that they have on the draft report we have.
Not working. I'm good, thank you. Sorry. My name is Julia Cornwell-McKean. I'm from the Australian Communications and Media Authority, where I wear two hats. One is the Investigations Manager for Unsolicited Communications, and the other is the Manager of our Internet Security Programs, including the Australian Internet Security Initiative. I'm honoured today to be here also representing the London Action Plan. I'm also an academic. In fact, I will shortly be submitting my PhD dissertation, and so it's from that approach I'd like to take the paper that we're considering today. While the first phase in an academic approach is to define terms for present purposes, I'll set this aside because the definition of spam is one for further discussion. The second phase is to define our aim or our mission, and I think that's important. I think that our mission could be to ensure confidence in email as a communications means for both commercial and personal use. And out of that fall some objectives. Firstly, to minimise or mitigate against detriment for citizens as a consequence of spam. And secondly, to minimise and mitigate against detriment for business as a consequence of spam. In my mind, there are two questions that arise out of that we need to consider. Are we trying to stop spam reaching inboxes, or are we trying to stop spam being sent? I suspect it's a bit of both, but I think that we need to understand what it is that we're trying to do. When the Australian government introduced legislation in 2003, some 11 years ago, it was always envisaged that legislation would only ever be part of the solution. In fact, our Parliament set out 5 strategies, a multi-layered strategic approach to combating spam. One part was strong legislation that was enforced. Then there was education, industry partnerships, technological solutions, and international cooperation. And while the threat has evolved, with the focus of spam moving sharply away from the delivery of messages containing adult content or promoting pharmaceuticals to the delivery of malware that we know can have a far greater impact, stealing credentials and distributing even more spam, to name a few things, these strategies actually still hold true. I always like to return to first principles, and I think they were a good set of principles that we can encourage others to use in other developing economies, using the lessons those of us who've been around for a while have learnt. Indeed, I've always said that education is the #1 strategy in the fight against spam, starting with a very basic message that if you don't recognise the sender or you're not expecting the message, don't open it and don't open any of the attachments. However, the message is becoming increasingly complex for citizens, with the backdrop of extending life cycles for computer software. Indeed, some of the life cycles are ending in terms of support for operating systems. And I note a particular concern I have in terms of education is there are a large number of systems still operating on Windows XP, which is no longer supported. It's an issue both in developing countries and developed countries, and it's one which leaves people with vulnerabilities and could impact on the spam problem more broadly. However, I digress. Legislation may be a good step for many economies, but that can only be if there's an appetite and resourcing for an adequate compliance and enforcement strategy. And compliance and enforcement strategy need not be one with a big stick. At the end of the day, the objective is to stop spam, and you need to be able to do that with minimum intervention. So there are low-cost, effective strategies that can be considered if that appetite and resourcing exists. For the moment, I won't speak about technological initiatives or industry partnerships because I know that I've dealt with some of those in some of the postings that I did for this group, and I suggest that some of you may like to read those further. However, I would like to conclude by referring to international cooperation. Today I represent both the ACMA and the London Action Plan, an international group of industry and enforcement. There have been cases, successful ones at that, where multiple jurisdictions have focused on a single respondent. I know that we hear many times about the case involving Herbal King and, as I like to call him, my friend Lancey, Lance Thomas Atkinson. It's cases such as these which have opened a dialogue between participating agencies to allow for the sharing of information and technology. However, it should be noted in these times of austerity in public programs, unless there is a particular strategic reason for us all to focus on a single respondent, that it may be more useful for us to share information, allowing us to broaden our access to enforcement and perhaps focus on many respondents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Christine, who'll provide some perspectives on what Brazil is doing to better manage their spam issues.
Good afternoon. As Karen said, I work at CertPR. We are CERT. We work with security incidents, and a lot of people ask us what's our interest in fighting spam as basically in like 10 years ago was not so clear how malicious it is. But the main interest from our perspective and our all involvement is really that spam just goes on because spammers and criminals and everyone is abusing the internet and the infrastructure. And if you go, that's all about money. They make so much money because it's so cheap to send spam and it's so easy to abuse our infrastructure. So this is one of the major points and perspectives that we are seeing this. But the whole anti-spam work being done in Brazil, it's multi-stakeholder since its beginning. It was a task force that was set up, coordinated by the Internet Steering Committee, that is multi-stakeholder. And we had in the table the ISPs, the telecommunication companies, the telecom regulator, the consumer protection organizations. We had other organizations that joined along the lines. We had people experts from the technical community joining. And the first step was to understand what was the problem, because if you just go for one solution, maybe it's not the best for your country. So like in the case of Brazil, we did some extensive studies and we saw that, as we suspected, we didn't have like Brazilians send spam to the world. We have the world abusing Brazil to send spam back to the world. So really clearly legislation could be effective for some other local problems, like to have our local spammers or people doing bad email marketing practices, or have like some self-regulation that we worked on. But the major problem that really dropped us from most of the top 10 countries, we used to be the #1 in the world for a long time. And it was really to take technical measures. And this is one of the points that I don't think there is a right order on what you should do to fight spam, but you need to think and you need to analyze for the specific problem you have, what is the best solution. From some studies that we are still conducting with the help of 11 countries and some certs that partner with us, we are seeing that there is like this trend that developing countries are being abused like Brazil was because of not implementing some technical measures. But we are still seeing a lot of the developed countries abusing the developing countries and coming from some other spam operations. So From the ones that are abusing us, probably legislation, and to go after the spammers themselves, those few that are doing the campaigns, that will be the one. But from us that are being abused, we really need to higher the stakes and make it more expensive for people to send spam. They shouldn't be able to be using our broadband, our end users, and infecting everyone to send spam. And this was a major effort that we did. That was the port management. We basically enforced the difference in some technical measures. We have more details later for people that want. But we also work on self-regulation for email marketing, that really there were some bad practices, and there still are, although they are not so malicious and not in such a volume as the other spam, and they don't appear to other countries because we are not generating spam for others. At the same time, there is some legislation being considered, but that is a long discussion and didn't prevent us from stopping like the flood of spam to the wall. We took some actions, and that not necessarily dependent on regulation or something like that, but this is still being discussed. And policies on ISPs and hostings can help a lot for bulletproof hosting and for other areas, because the spammers need to host their content somewhere. So it's a mix of policies, practices, technical measures that had to be discussed a lot. There was a lot of discussion about why it would not be bad for net neutrality, why it was not censorship, why we were not hindering the consumers. So we had all these discussions in the country. And it was a consensus that although they could look like some measures that were extreme, they were the best course to go. So we hope that we can have, by the end of the year, to finish the translation of a major report that we hope can help other countries to see what we did, and the whole multi-stakeholder discussion and all the stakes, and really how to move forward to get our networks, I think, cleaner, or at least not as abused. They could still be infected, but they will not be so valuable anymore because they will not be able to send spam from them. So this is just a short overview that I think could help people that, like, where do I start? You should probably start from where does make more sense for your country, for your ISP, for the problem you have. And understanding the problem, I think, is really key for that. Just my beginning thoughts.
Thank you, Christine. Next, I have Betsy Bodner from the U.S. Federal Trade Commission to speak about their perspectives.
Thank you, Karen, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try to be very brief because I know all of you have a lot to share as well, and we want to spend as much time as possible hearing from you and getting input on the report and steps forward. So I will try to be brief. It's hard as a lawyer to be brief because we're usually paid by the word, but I'll do my best here. So I'm from the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, and we are fundamentally a consumer protection law enforcement agency. The history of the FTC dealing with spam is maybe a microcosm of the problem of spam as it's developed over the time, so maybe our experience could be illustrative and helpful in our discussions. About 11 years ago, our Congress passed a law called CAN Spam, and those letters stand for something, but I can't quite remember what. And it did not outlaw spam. What it did was say consumers should be able to opt out. Subject line and header information needs to be accurate, and that adult content needs to be properly labeled. There were other provisions as well. At that time, the problem that Congress was addressing was that people's email boxes were filled with commercial advertisements that people found a nuisance and unwanted. And so that dealt with what we'll call the nuisance problem, the clutter problem of spam. At that time, the London Action Plan, also called LAP, was organized, and as Julia said, it's an interesting and remarkable group because it's not simply government representatives, but it's also consultancies such as WOUT is a member there in private, and Michael O'Riordan is a member. Do you represent the MOG? Or yes, the Messaging, Malware, Mobile Anti-Abuse Working Group, GSMA. So it brings together people with from various perspectives, but also with different tools for addressing the problem. So at that point, again, the problem was a nuisance, but over the last 10 years, the problem has migrated in a different way. So I would say in terms of the enforcement of our law, that's less of a priority at the FTC. Oh, at this point I'm supposed to say my comments are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Federal Trade Commission. So the problem has migrated. As Jonas has said, it's gone from one platform to another. It's gone from just your email box to your mobile device. There is an emergence of spam-related type problems on social networks, and so we need to be agile. We need to understand what all the tools are. So the purpose and the focus often of the London Action Plan has changed and migrated as the threat has changed, but at the same time we're very much focused on working with organizations, regulatory bodies, interested parties on how they see spam at this moment. We understand that the development of spam and its impact differs in different economies, and we're very much aware and responsive to that. One of the initiatives that the London Action Plan hopes to pursue with ISOC, the Internet Society, is a mentoring program. So for those in the London Action Plan who may be more technologically oriented, for them to partner with others who are from other economies who are interested in learning about how to implement technological solutions, what certain policy initiatives might be. For those who have another interest in a regulatory function, we hope to partner that way. So maybe that's something that we can talk about further. So over the course of 10 years, the threat has changed, the nature of the threat has changed, and our response has changed. But one thing has remained constant, and that is that there is no silver bullet. There is no single way of addressing this problem, and I think that's what we hope to hear from as we proceed, that education is important, technology is important, enforcement is important. We all do what we can to approach the problem from our various perspectives, but we also need to do it together. Because, as Christina said, it's not simply what you see within your borders, but what is coming from other nations. And I guess just the last point that I would put is that is why it's so important that we talk to each other, so that we are able to coordinate, we're able to share information in accordance with what our national laws allow, and we can coordinate whether it is talking about what the threats are, what the solutions are. So I hope that we get a lot of collaboration out of our process today, and that we come up with ways of working in partnership so that we can be more effective to protect both our consumers and those in everyone else's country. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Next, Michael Reardon, and he'll talk a little bit about an industry organization that focuses specifically on spam and other network threats.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michael Reardon. What I'd like to really start off with is a perspective on spam, because the fact is it's not very hard to do. I mean, you don't often get prosecuted for doing it, with all due deference to the regulators in the room. Quite a lot of people get away with it. And unlike a bank robbery, you don't get shot when you try to do it. So there's an awful lot of really cool outsourced services there. I think my colleague from Thailand and from Trend sort of named some of them, but there are services which allow you to rent space on a botnet. Once you've rented that space on a botnet, there's really neat control panels that show you just how effective you are at delivering spam. It's almost like being a valid email sender. You can look and go, oh yeah, we got all that bunch through to Comcast. We hit Yahoo with a few million. You can actually see what you're doing. They offer templates so you can make your spam look pretty. There are services out there which offer capture breaking services, so that if you're one of these ISPs that offer free accounts where captures protect the account generation service, you can be creating thousands of accounts, which incidentally, and I think was illustrated, then get sold at so much per thousand on the appropriate underground forum. So what we're talking about is something that's got a pretty low cost of entry, has very decent outsourced services supporting it. You might call it rather a modern business model. So let's talk about MORG. MORG, the Messaging, Malware and Mobile Abuse Anti-Working Group. Sorry, it's rather messaging, yeah, MORG. About 2002, I think Bill Gates said spam was going to get solved real soon now. Well, MORG formed in 2004 when spam really was a fairly major problem. Right now, our members control over 1 billion mailboxes globally, so they see an enormous proportion of the world's mail traffic. The kind of members we have are people like Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Comcast, Orange, Telefonica, Mail.ru in Russia. In fact, we've got members on pretty much every continent. We've just opened a chapter in India because we had some particularly good members out there who were prepared to undertake this work. And to be honest with you, Morg is a volunteer-driven organization and relies on people of good intent and goodwill to get to do the work. We focused on messaging abuse, on spam, until around about 2008. When we expanded our ambit to mobile and to malware, and with deference to my colleague from the GSMA, yes, we do recognize that mobile spam is a very significant problem. And for some economies where they've sort of, an awful lot of their internet takes place over relatively thin pipes, spam is a massive problem. It was brought home to me personally when a friend of mine lent me an Indian mobile for a trip to New Delhi. And I couldn't understand it, but there was an awful lot of it. And when I got back, I discovered that there was an awful lot of encouragement to buy things I really didn't need to get. And apparently he was paying for it on his SIM card. So we also work on voice. We're beginning to work in the voice abuse area as well, with sort of, as VoIP. So we're doing some work there, and we do have very close liaisons, and I think one's already been highlighted with the London Action Plan. We also liaise very closely with organisations such as ICANN, who are an important part of providing resources that are used for spamming, and the IETF, who come up with the technical protocols which allow us to do such things as email authentication to defeat the spammers. One of the other things that we've done is we've launched a foundation, because Morg really works for its members, and our members, as I say, are a number of continents, but they tend to be the larger operators. We've also launched a foundation which is designed to provide support for training in developing economies that are relatively recently connected to the net, where they've got massive amounts more bandwidth. I mean, an example being about a year and a half ago, we were working with the African Telecommunications Union in Nairobi to provide elements of training out there. And we've also worked with the US Telecom Training Institute, the USTTI, to provide training there. And that is something that we want to do because it's very much in our interests to suppress internet abuse wherever, because wherever it comes from, it affects us all. And I mean, we all know the stories of the 419ers and the interesting stuff, and that has given certain countries very bad and largely undeserved reputations, and that doesn't do them any good at all. So, on to the spam statistics. Here I'm afraid I do have to differ a little bit from my colleague from Trend, because we've been looking at spam since 2005 and having access to this information of about 1 billion mailboxes. Whilst we don't call it spam, we call it unwanted email, because spam doesn't have a globally accepted definition. I think that's obvious that's certainly addressed in the report. Spam, I mean, a lot of us say spam when you see it. I mean, some people regard letters from their grandmother as spam, or those jokes you get from your uncle as spam, but they're not really, I don't think. But so we've seen the proportion of unwanted email since 2005 remain pretty consistent at the 80 to 85% level. And this is actually despite botnet takedowns. I mean, there's been a lot of botnet takedowns where various botnets have been taken down and then they've slowly come back to life because you haven't been able to effect a completely clean and total botnet takedown, which means that they come back to life and they're gradually repropagated. So we've seen that. So what sort of output do we get out of Morg? Our output really is best practices, things you should do to minimize spam. I mean, examples I'll give you. Port 25. One of the biggest things you can do to make your spam problem better, certainly when it's sending, is to block port 25. Very, very important. Don't let consumers use port 25 directly, because if you do, you're going to get a lot of spam. Maintain feedback loops. The ISPs should cooperate with each other. Now, one of the things that was very interesting to me when I was out in Kenya was that talking to ISP participants out there, if their employees talk to each other, that it was regarded as suspicious. If they talk to the competition, ISPs will only succeed in the suppression of abuse by working incredibly closely together. I mean, I know my colleagues at the various ISPs around the United States and globally. You know, I can pick up the phone in the middle of the night. I mean, I know most of them are on my Facebook, so I know when their baby's been born. You know, we are a very close, tightly knit community, and that's the way it works. And this is one of the things that has to go on, is people have to talk to each other. Things like using email authentication, that's important. New standards such as DMARC, which is reporting based on, is a standard which allows you to act on what the sender wants you to do with their mail, and that's well worth looking at. Some of the Morg work has gone on to become embodied in IETF standards, such as the RFC on botnet management 6561 and the feedback loop one, which is 6449. And finally, all our stuff is publicly available. Morg doesn't come up with best practices and then jealously hoard them. We put them on the internet. We want people to use them. They're all at www.morg.org. It's a really good thing if people use them. Some of them have been translated into multiple languages. If anybody wants to translate them into more languages, we're really happy. We'd like to take a look at it just to ensure the technical veracity of the document before it gets published. But otherwise, please have at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. At this point in time, you know, we've heard a lot of comments on the work and the draft that we have at this point in time from the best practice lists. We've had a lot of comments. There's a public comment cycle going on right now where the document is posted, and it doesn't end until the 5th of September right now, although there's some discussion about potentially extending that public comment cycle so all of you in the room will have an opportunity to review the report and provide comments on the content. And now in that light, we have some comments to deal with right now that I thought might be useful for our discussion today for the time we have remaining. And the most significant one is started in the beginning of the report, and in terms of the definition of the issue. And I know Michael has raised it, and several of the other speakers so far have raised the issue, and that is, what is it? And this is what is it in the context of what we're trying to produce in this document. I don't know if they can pull the document up on the screen or not. Okay. But you will see in the beginning of our draft, there is some mention of unwanted email. There's also a context where we use unsolicited communications. You know, many approaches have been used to define what it is, in essence, known as spam. I think that it would help us as we move through our work if we can reach some sort of consensus on an approach that we want to take in terms of commonality. Is it unwanted? Is it unsolicited? The majority of the comments we've received so far on the draft, the preference is to use is unsolicited. I can also tell you in 2012, for the International Telecommunications Regulations, the ITR Treaty, in Article 7, they defined it as unsolicited forms of electronic communication. So it seems like the preponderance of opinion is that we should be working on unsolicited things, in essence, spam, rather than unwanted things. So I wanted to open that up to see if there is any discussion around those points, if we can kind of reach some, you know, common ground to say, okay, for our work in this document, this is the approach we want to take. Please, sir.
Thanks, Michaela Naylan. I think unwanted is a very dangerous term to use. I don't want to get a bill from my phone provider. I don't want that hot girl to say no to going out with me tonight. I don't want to discover that my friend has cancer. I mean, these are all things I don't want. It's very, very different to unsolicited. So I think unwanted as a choice of words, as a native English speaker, I think is completely inappropriate.
Do we have any other opinions on whether it should be, at least for the context of our outcome report, we're working on unwanted things or unsolicited things? Thomas, please.
Thanks very much, Karen. And so Thomas Lamanauskas from ITU. So just as you were referring to international telecommunication regulations, just a couple of 2 points from, a couple of points from me, just, is that from January 1st next year, ITRs, there will be the treaty that will be applicable and enforced among 89 countries in the world, that will actually say that member states should endeavor to take necessary measures to prevent the propagation of unsolicited bulk electronic communications and minimize its impact on electronic communication services, and member states are encouraged to cooperate in that sense. So it's, and for me, in the spirit of the paper, which calls for all the actors to work together in terms of member states, in terms of private sector and other sector, probably its most productive way to work together is also when we, when we try to start with a similar base, and definitions is one of them. So I think in that regard, we would say that, from our perspective, it would be most productive to use similar terminology so that we can then work for the same goal with the same understanding.
Thank you very much. Well, there again, based on the discussion we've had so far, there seems to be more of a preference for unsolicited. You had some comments, please.
Hello. Okay. My name is Ugo. I'm from Nigeria. Until recently, I worked for Nigeria Internet Registration Association, managers of Nigeria's country code.ng. The managers run a registrar system, and I discovered that sometimes in the process of, there are times I had to send bulk emails, okay, and to our registrars, to the registrars of .ng, and sometimes after you've sent those communication, a registrar gets back to you to say, I didn't receive your mail. I guess it's trying to prevent something like this, spam, whether it's going to be called unwanted or unsolicited. And sometimes you send mails, you send mails to them, they don't receive it either. So I think while we're discussing this, such factors should be taken into consideration, because it's not all of the time that unwanted emails or unsolicited emails are spam or illegal or illegitimate or something. That's one. Somebody made an allusion to 419. 419 is a Nigerian problem. Somebody also said something about the spammers have to have a place to host their content. I'll tell you what was done in .ng. .ng is not attractive to spammers or scammers. If the people who do 419 emails are likely not to be doing it from a .ng domain name, because the moment it is discovered, that website will be shut down. The domain name will be taken off for certain. There's a policy position on that. And I think, so if you discover that most of these spammers in Nigeria, they operate from a Yahoo account. So I think it's something the GTLD or the ccTLD, have to take policy positions about. Sorry, you disagree? Okay, but I think, well, that's how we have been able to tackle it. .ng is not attractive to people who want to send, who want to scam. It isn't. Thank you.
Given that I was the person that raised the 419 issue, yeah, I would completely agree. We don't see it coming out of the .ng domain. We very often see it coming out of a whole bunch of the large free email providers, and so it's not. I don't see it as a .ng issue. And to be honest with you, I don't even see it particularly. I mean, whilst it's attributed, 419 is the generic name that seems to be used now. It comes from all over the place, but the unfortunate association with that particular section of the Nigerian criminal code has gone down in myth and legend as well.
Thank you. And I think you've raised some very good examples for us to consider, as well as the fact that a reputation is at stake. Whether you have earned it or not, things that are being attributed in particular to Nigeria that don't happen in Nigeria. I mean, that's one of the risks in the past from spam and some of the risks that are being faced in the future when we look at unsolicited forms of electronic communication. So if everyone is comfortable with us using that as our framework for the document, that we're working on unsolicited electronic communication? Oh, yes, sir.
I think one of the things that's interesting about unsolicited is, whilst, yes, I think unsolicited is probably one way of looking at it, the way that in a lot of cases it's actually stuff is spotted as spam is because it is actually handled as unwanted. And a lot of spam detection systems now rely on feedback from end users and the things like the CloudMark technology, where people actually click on a button to say, I don't want it. Now, it may have been unsolicited, but it's also not wanted. So we have to bear that in mind, because spam, there we are.
No, that's also a very good point, that it's very important for all of us as users to keep our network operators informed of things that are sent our way that we didn't ask for, and that they weren't solicited. Therefore, we need to come up with steps and processes to deal with it. But what I was trying to get at is if we're all in agreement, or that we can approach this in terms of the work of the outcomes document and what we're trying to draft and produce, that we're focusing on unsolicited things that may also be unwanted, and a process needs to be in place to establish that would help us then provide some context to what we're trying to accomplish. We have a vote down.
No, as drafter of the report, I would like to do an intervention. We do seem to have some sort of rough consensus, as the report already mentioned, but that there is a difference about how it's looked at officially, how it's looked at unofficially. And what I would like to pose here, following up on Mike's comment, to do with footnote or something, saying that industry looks upon it as it is contacted by end users, and then you can say unwanted in the footnote and make it unsolicited in the official text. Would that be a way forward? Because that is the distinction, what the end user flags and what is officially acted upon. And there is a nuance between the two, as far as I can see at this moment. How do you look at that, Mike, as a possible way forward?
If I without dwelling on this, because I think we could spend the whole afternoon talking about this. It's a very challenging issue, and as our friend said across, there are lots of things that are unwanted, and I think the phrase can be interpreted in different ways. I think when Michael was referring to it, it was consumers marked it as unwanted. In other words, it was spam. That is, it came into their mailbox and they're marking it, and I'm probably in their email service, it is this spam? And they say yes. And that's why it's unwanted. So I think maybe it muddies the water to include that word, because it could be overly broad and a very subjective thing. So I would just kind of go with the clean copy, and if that's all right, rather than, I think we're trying to find something very clean and direct, if that's possible. Thank you, Wout.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Since I was the one who was talking about unwanted, I have no issue with Woot's suggestion of putting it in a footnote, because I think there's a disjoint between those of us in industry who deal with this stuff on a day-to-day basis and your average end user who sees an email that they do not want, and depending on what system they're using, they could be marking it as spam, they could be marking it as something else. So I think the clarification type thing in the footnote, as from my perspective, is perfectly okay.
Okay, well, we can make note of that for our next draft, because based on all the comments we received, and we've received numerous comments through the public consultation so far, we will be working on a second draft of the document. So we need to approach this, along the lines of what's raised today in our discussion and what's been submitted through the public comment cycle. We will improve upon what we have. I mean, our intention is to capture the best input, the best examples, case studies, and the information that we possibly can to contain it in this report, so we can frame what is spam and provide some context around it, and to identify the work that's being accomplished up to this point by various entities, by the GSMA, by the ITU, by MOG, I mean, London Action Plan. There are a lot of agencies, organizations, and experts that are working to address this problem that we're having right now. And so how do we frame all of that and capture that information that therefore can be used and put out for others to take advantage of, that may not be aware of all the work that's being done by all of these various organizations and entities. One thing I think that will be critical as we move forward here too is to hear other voices and examples. These are the things that are known by lots of folks, but there's also lots of information and examples, experiences that we need to capture too that are unknown. So how do we get at that information so that we can provide this collective that can be used by developing economies as they move into the internet and broadband and other access, so that they can be aware of things that they should watch out for, and then maybe use this as a means to provide some information on choices that they could make as they move forward. At least that is my hope as we go through this document. So do we have any other comments on the draft itself? I know that there's been significant ones online. I wanted to make sure that if there was anybody in the room, if you had an opportunity to provide some additional thoughts and input that we might want to consider. Thomas.
Thanks, Karen. So I think we couldn't provide more detailed comments, of course, offline as well. But I think just looking at the document as well. So when we discussed already the definitional question, and I think that's where I also mentioned already that from our perspective, we think it's pretty landmark that from the next year we'll have international instruments that's enforced among, pretty large chunk of the countries, which regulates, which basically encourages those countries to address spam issue together. So I think that could be documented, and there are some references to ITRs, but they should be adjusted in terms of the language, because there's not necessarily the final provision seems to be put in that. But that's technicality, and I think we'll work to address that. And also in terms of some of the other work that we do, would be happy to contribute with more specifics on our development work. Specifically the work that we're doing on our study group 2 on secure information communication networks and best practices for developing culture in cybersecurity. And there is a list of best practices also developed in terms of what ISPs could do in protecting their networks, and that's something that could be included. And as well with our standardization activities, because our standardization group, study group 17, has 11 recommendations on various spam-related matters. And in that context, and even following up also from what GSM is saying, we would also encourage to look maybe at least in some aspect beyond email only, because the work that many of us are doing now is related to other aspects, which can be delivered via internet. Email, as internet can be delivered to deliver SMSs, even as a sending platform. Yeah, the same way we and ITF are dealing with voice over IP spam, if you will, like call spam, and that's increasingly a big issue that we all are trying to address. I don't know to which extent you want to expand on that, but at least the fact that it's evolving matter might be useful to address and to some common note. Maybe that's for the future reference, so that some work needs to be done in that area as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that that was a nice segue, because one of the things we also need to think about as we work to finalize our draft outcome document and stabilize it is to what's the future of this best practice forum and the work that we're on. It sounds like there are some next steps that we can take and further work that we can investigate, collect information, experiences, case studies, and others on, Thomas, as you pointed out, in terms of VoIP and that Michael stated as well. I think there's other aspects of spam as it moves into other media that beyond just email. I mean, we started off with email because that's where the major context, I think, of the work has been in terms of developing best practices, developing approaches, developing legislation and regulation around what's happening there. It's also, I think, the easiest to talk about as you progress into other areas where spam becomes the delivery mechanism of malicious things that has a broader impact on not only the access to the internet, but the user of the internet, that we need to potentially focus more of a dialogue on and see if we can provide better examples then as we progress through this work. Do we have any other comments on the draft at this point in time, or suggestions for things that we might want to consider when we look at future work between this IGF and the IGF in Brazil next year?
One thing I just wanted to add, and again, we can take this offline, is I've scanned through the document, and I think relevant to the discussion this afternoon, there are a lot of techniques that has been used, and our colleague from MOG also has mentioned that it is very explosive when it comes to the new techniques as well. So probably revisiting some of the new techniques that may not be, that have yet to be included would probably be worthwhile, especially for a lot of government and institutions that are very, very particular to the ones that is very specific to them. As we know, there are certain targeted technique that is relevant to only certain countries or institutions. At least they can, pardon the word, pick and choose what seems to be more relevant to them, and then they can start focusing on that for solution or mitigation process.
Thank you. I think that would be an excellent suggestion as well as we look towards the future and what our next steps might be once we finish drafting the report that we have right now.
I also think that one of the areas that we do have to sort of pay some attention to is around the suppression of botnets. Botnets, whilst not being the ultimate cause, they're certainly one of the great facilitators of the delivery of spam. And so I think we need to make sure that contained within the report is a reasonable degree of emphasis that, when you're getting your ISPs to look at the spam issue, they've got to be looking pretty much simultaneously at the malware/consumer botnet issue as well. And that's not just, and that's going to be much wider, I think, as we move forward into more machines, devices that are non-human actuated, the much hyped Internet of Things coming along, attaching. And whilst I think currently the spam sending fridge is probably kind of unique, nevertheless, things are going to get abused, and services are going to be left open on devices that get sold for very ordinary purposes, which are going to get used for all the wrong things. And I have no doubt that spam will be one of them.
Thank you. I think that's also something that would be very useful to continue on once we get this report stabilized, to look at, it's a delivery mechanism of a lot of things, and identify some of those critical elements that would be useful information to share with others.
One thing that we have not spoken about much, but has been on the agenda of other panels and discussions, is the role of education. The role of education of users. I'm looking over at Michael Kaiser. Users of email and steps that they can take, as well as businesses that may be unintended relays of malicious email, and whether there is a component that we need to discuss more fully or around the table talk about how that fits in. I know that certainly it's part of any program, but we haven't really spent a whole lot of time earlier in our discussion talking about the role of education.
I also think that's a very critical component for us to consider, too, in terms of how we want to proceed. You say, gentleman over there. And then,
yeah, hi, Michael Kaiser from the National Cybersecurity Alliance in the United States. Thank you for calling us out. Yeah, I mean, we do education awareness on cybersecurity. I would say that you can't fully battle this issue unless you have the users on your side as well, and they need to know what to do and when to do it and when not to do it, really, in this case as well. I mean, I think somebody raised the issue, I think it was great, you know, that the risk vector has changed, right, from unsolicited email or commercial email to a vector of attack, right? So spam is not just about things you don't want to get anymore. It's about things that could do bad things to you if you do the wrong thing with it. And I think that has to be an important part of this discussion. It's not just a nuisance or something clogging up the system. It's actually a way that bad things can happen. And that has to be part of the discussion because it still remains. And actually, small business is a good example. It remains a way that small businesses get attacked, right, as well as the way consumers get attacked. So I think we have to remember that in this discussion.
excellent points. Thank you very much. Jonas?
Thanks. Just to build on Bet's suggestion, it's education of users not just on email, but also text users as well, but also on the government side, education of policymakers and governments on what their role is, particularly in relation to empowering the enforcement agencies to prosecute effectively these spammers and give them sanction power as well to enforce and impose financial penalties to deter crime. I think that that's key as well, because it's about making sure that all stakeholders understand their role in helping fight spam.
No, wild comment. I got one comment to Michael to come back to. You said about the Internet of Things that, if I remember correctly, there is a comment in the document somewhere about new parties that have to enter this discussion. I think that is something that you would like to have boldened what I hear from your words.
I do think there may be some additional emphasis there. The other bit that I was going to suggest with this report is that we make sure that we keep the technical recommendations out of the main body of the report and put them in some sort of technical recommendations appendices, because you don't want to. There's a lot of basic principles that I believe that go into a report of this size, nature, things like, the emphasis on trust, the emphasis on cooperation, and some basic steps that you have to undertake, and some basic roles that are attributable to the various actors in the whole process, ranging from the legislature, the regulator, through to the ISP, and through to the role of the consumer. But when you actually come to the technical measures that need to be undertaken, I suspect if you put them into the main body of the report, what you'll do is you'll dilute from the emphasis that you'd really want to get. And technical stuff generally, we need certain people to read it. If you're interested in the technical stuff, you'll go to the technical stuff. But if you're someone for whom this is not something that you do all the time, you want to read the key bits, and maybe it's just a bit about the report structure. It's not I think we've got all the right things. It's just where we leave them that I think.
The second comment I would like to make. What was also clear, I think, for what is being discussed at this moment, that up to very recently you heard say at most huge conferences that spam is not a problem anymore. I'm not seeing anything in my inbox, so it's sort of over. What I hear here is that it's definitely not over, but maybe in a new level of the ball game. There's also a lot of costs involved, I think, and that is something which is also being touched upon in the report. But is it possible from the industry side, for example, to say something about the costs actually that is being made? Because that could be a driver to get, for example, governments interested again in this topic, which they do not really seem to be anymore at this moment. Also looking around, there are not so many EU or the national governments present. So is there anybody who would like to comment on that, either now or online, so that we could reflect some more? Michele, thanks.
Please, go ahead.
Thanks. I think Woot and I kind of had discussed this prior to the sessions, just for the sake of transparency. We are the largest hosting provider in Ireland, so we process quite a bit of email and other things. In terms of the costs, they're huge. I mean, that's using really simple terms, it's huge. The bulk of customer service queries that we get are email related, and of those, up until we made a huge investment in something with little or no return, the bulk of the email complaints were spam related. We've ended up spending thousands of euro per month outsourcing some of the scanning of email to stop certain aspects of this, because the problem had got to the point where it was completely unworkable. Some statistics I got from our sysadmins prior to this meeting. SMTP connections, very technical, my apologies, but I'm sorry, if you talk about spam you can't avoid it. We were dropping 90% of SMTP connections into our core network by doing lookups against Spamhouse's blacklists. Now, the lady from Nigeria was talking about having issues sending email, and this is the collateral damage issue, which is another cost, which needs to be highlighted. So in the case of ourselves, at present, we are blocking 20,000 IP addresses from our core network. Certain specific machines within the network would also be blocking up to 100,000 IPs, and we have been known to end up blocking entire countries. And we don't do this lightly, but we have no choice. And the collateral damage to that is, and the cost is that it means that because somebody over there is misbehaving, you, the innocent person in the middle, you cannot send or receive email or other communications. As somebody as a provider, the problem we see is that a lot of other providers are completely non-responsive, that they don't take responsibility for the fact that they are providing services and either knowingly or unknowingly are allowing for abuse of their networks. I mean, there was a session this morning on blocking that was moderated by Paul Vixie, which was very, very interesting, but the two are linked together. I mean, a lot of us end up having to block very large portions of the internet, and it's got nothing to do with freedom of speech, it's got nothing to do with legislation, it's to do with the fact that some botnet somewhere is trying to rape our network. I'm sorry if you don't like the word rape, but I can't. I think it's the best word I can think of. I mean, it's a violent attack on you, and you have to take action. But unfortunately, a lot of ISPs, a lot of hosting providers, they don't even provide an abuse contact, and if they do provide an abuse contact, they don't respond. And we all end up paying the cost of that.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, you know, if you can provide that in some context for us for our report, I think it would be very useful to capture that. I know I've read some studies that some researchers from, I think it's Google and Microsoft have done, where even just for an individual user, if it takes them 5 seconds to delete an unsolicited email, and you equate that, you know, time and money to about $25 an hour, you know, you add the costs up for how many millions of people who happen to be using email and are online, you know, you've got millions, billions of time and energy spent to deleting things that weren't solicited, let alone the network costs and all the other impacts that are out there.
Can I interject here? I think we have to be really careful about using financial statistics. I really do. I mean, when you look at, you know, Gmail, how many people look at their Gmail spam folder? Very few people. How many people look at their Outlook spam folder? I actually think some of these statistics are quite spurious and are quite often generated by security companies in search of good stats. And I think we need to be tremendously careful about using those, because if you put them in, there's a danger of detracting from the credibility of this report rather than adding to it by using shock horror statistics which don't actually get us where we need to get to. Yeah, spam is expensive, and I grant you that. I mean, the ISP I work at, we have hundreds of servers literally fighting spam, and we have, you know, teams of tens of people who work in our security and abuse department. They're not just handling spam, but they're handling other forms of abuse as well. And it is, for an extremely large ISP, an extremely expensive business. So I would say that, but I would be very, very careful about attributing cost per user, because we end up with what look like very unlikely numbers. And it's important that if we're going to be credible, we also have to be, if we're going to be credible, we've got to have credible numbers.
And just coming back on you, I think if you accept the fact that there is a cost and there is collateral damage, and these are costs that are very, very hard to put a dollar or euro number on, I think we're on the same page. I mean, the thing about, you know, how long a user spends looking at email, personally I don't know, and I don't really care. I do care about the fact that we end up having to spend thousands of euro on mail servers and firewalls and other things to deal with all this. And the problem, of course, is if you look around, it's a drive to the bottom in terms of price, so you can't even recoup those costs, because everybody expects you to provide spam-free email for free.
And actually, I was using it more as an example that there are lots of different costs. Users have costs as well as networks and other providers. Christine?
Yes, I would just like to say that I think probably this could be some of the topics for further discussion from here to Brazil. And especially, for example, when we were doing all our anti-spam work, one of the major keys that all stakeholders said that we would like more neutral and better statistics and not vendor statistics. And this is why we had a major part of our work that is still a research project that we are running, is how to have spam statistics about how people are abusing the infrastructure without depending on vendors and without depending on a user reporting that that's a spam. So we have some statistics that have part of the problem, and then maybe that could be something to work on. It's because, and why do I say that? Because most of the time when now I'm talking to especially countries in Latin America, they always say that, okay, but why should us invest into anti-spam, into port 25 management, or into doing something like that? So it is really an operational cost or not. And I'm not talking about really like costs of emails, but really why it is important, on how expensive it is to implement. So that could be something for forward work to get like ISPs that already implemented that. That could be through MOG to have like a report on what was the impact, what was the reduction on spam leaving our networks, what was the impact on operational cost. And it doesn't need to be dollar figures. That could be about hours spent about equipment, or something that could have like this motivation, especially for people that are putting money into anti-spam practices to help. And this is the question that we are getting over and over again from all small and medium ISPs, that I say, okay, I know that this is probably good, that it worked in Brazil, but how do I justify implementing it? So that could maybe be some comments for like some future best practices on metrics or on costs, but not necessarily we need a dollar figure per spam, because we will never know how much spam is out there. I think that is basically just a food for thought for our future work.
Thank you very much. Michael?
I'd just like to add something. A number of years ago, we had some folks from IIJ in Japan come out to talk to us when Japan implemented pretty much a universal port 25 block across its entire ISP community. And the statistics that they showed for the reduction in outgoing spam were unbelievably, massively effective. can I describe what port 25 blocking is? Basically, mail is sent over, SMTP mail is sent over port 25, and when we do port 25 blocking, we say that we're not going to allow customers to send mail using port 25 in the terms of a cable company, which is what I work for. We put on the cable modem itself a configuration which blocks port 25 and does not allow traffic over that port, and basically stops outgoing email. And we only allow our customers to communicate with our email servers over other ports, and this effectively stops the botnets or the bots sending spam automatically. And there's also a very good document on port 25 blocking on the Morgue website. Please read it. It comes in 3 different languages, as well as English.
Thank you very much. I think we've had a very good discussion about our draft outcome report, some great comments for things for us to include as we produce the next version of this draft. I do want to remind everyone that the public comment cycle is still open, so if you have some thoughts on comments, suggestions, content to insert into the document, please submit it. Either on the best form practice email list or through the public comment cycle. Either way, the information gets into the document so that we can consider that as we move forward. Oh, and we have a remote participant comment? No, go ahead, please.
It's not important, but we have Simon from Cameroon remotely participating the whole time, and we've asked if he wanted to ask a question. He didn't, but he did comment that he thought this was an excellent and wonderful discussion. So I wanted to put that in.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that comment. I'm sure we all appreciate it here as we try and get our arms around what this is and move forward with our document. And it sounds like we have, through our conversation, identified some key things that we can focus on in the coming year so that we can produce another iteration that captures some more future-looking context and some opportunity costs, or at least examples of what needs to be done. Potentially look at consumer education and how we might frame what would be a good approach to consider for educating consumers as they use various devices and move forward and onto the internet for what they need to watch out for and how they might want to consider protecting themselves. So do we have any other questions, comments, suggestions for the work of this best practice forum? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chip Sharp at Cisco Systems. And it's interesting sitting in on the session next door and then for a little bit and then coming and listening to this one. And just one thing, thinking about how these issues interact, thinking about how the port 25 blocking solution interacts with the net neutrality debate. And that'll be an ongoing debate that we will have to look at. But I agree that it's actually been a solution that stopped a lot of spam, but it does interact with the other policy discussions that we're having here. Something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chip. I know that there are a lot of other things on the fringe that will have some context for how people might want to approach and implement any kind of spam tools, legislation, or approaches within their country, because the other policy decisions will frame a lot of those opportunities or restrict some of those opportunities. But right now we're trying to come up with a compendium of useful information, hopefully, to help with those choices, along with how they choose other policies to implement. Well, if there isn't anything else that you would like to suggest, contribute, or add to the work that we have in front of us and the work that we hope to do in the future, I'd like to thank you all very much for participating in this discussion, and I do look forward to your comments. You have many ways of doing that, so please send information, send your questions, send your examples in so we can capture those for others to use. Thank you.
We won't say it. We don't say it. There's a sound man in the back. Yes. Yes.
I thought that was my job. I avoided you for so long, but it's over now. What, avoiding him? Avoiding him, yeah. Oh no, you can go back to avoiding him. I've known him for years. But yeah, great. Thank you for doing this. Looking forward. Doing some provocations. I like every style. I understand you're an expert at provocation.